So my interest in DRC is there are lots of things that a person can write about the DRC, but for me the big interest is the big market that is in DRC, and DRC has officially joined the East African community. You were part of the team that was in DRC towards the end of May, organizing that summit with officials in Kinshasa and officials in Goma. What's Uganda targeting in DRC?
I think we begin from the fact of the matter that DRC is not Norway. It is not America. It is our neighboring market. And for thousands of years, the Interlacustrine region has traded with each other and with the rest of the world. Actually, up until around 1575, when we started to get the Arabs coming and the Portuguese, we were trading the kingdoms of the Great Lakes and Eastern Congo. So it is not new, it is our neighborhood. But it is a neighborhood that has been a little bit troubled by insecurity and lack of infrastructure to facilitate trade. Now, in the last 2 years, many things have changed between Uganda, especially Western Uganda side, and Eastern Congo. One of these has been the acceptance that we can only deal with insecurity in Eastern Congo if we work together. So if you think of 341 or thereabout militia groups of different stripes and kinds, even if Congo had the capacity of its own, it really requires that it works with the neighbors, especially Uganda, to deal with that insecurity. So when we had this agreement for our security forces to work together, it brought another unintended consequences, which was that you are going to have to build roads to get into Eastern Congo, to transport goods, to transport the army. So one thing leads to another, and this market began to really be opened up in a manner that it had not been for so many years. I should also add that we have had very good will from President Tshisekedi, who I think in the last 60 years has been the one who has done rapprochement, who has reached out to all the neighbors and joined East Africa. So really, our intention as Uganda is twofold, like any African country looking for markets. First is that there is no vaccine for dealing with poverty. The only vaccine I know for dealing with poverty is twofold. One, organization, that you organize production very well from a farm level to the market level, and therefore you have the required quantities and consistency to supply a market like Congo. Now, that market of Congo has been for 60 years supplied by Europe, South America. I keep giving this example. When we were in Congo in May, a ship carrying offals from Turkey at just less than $1 a kilo landed at the border, at the ocean point. I forget it's just getting out of my mind. The port 150 kilometers from Kinshasa.
I think that is Matadi.
Matadi, great. So the ship landed at Matadi and it was selling 150% less than the meat we produce in Uganda. So you need organization to be able to compete for a market that has been fed by other countries thousands of miles away. So organization for me is one way to deal with poverty. The second one is when you are organized and increase production, you need to deal with quality. Our products get into these markets packaged improperly, packed improperly, no branding, no advertising, and therefore we don't very easily get favorable attraction from the Congolese, especially in the Western side, who have had a lot of products from, if I take the industry, I mean dairy, they have Présidé. Présidé comes from France. If I'm going to take a milkman, it takes a lot of market research and market work. So quality is another way that really we want to work with Congo to improve. You improve production quantity, you improve quality. I think the third one is understanding that market, its tastes and preferences, because there are language issues, there are slightly cultural nuances that affect customs towards food. And then you have a small growing middle class that has very high standards, very high consumption. So the understanding of that market is another vaccine for dealing with poverty in our country. But let me add, trade is two-way. We're not working to dump our products in Congo. We want a two-way. We would like joint ventures. We would like to start businesses together of young people. We bring skill, they bring raw material, and we expand capacity in Uganda and in Congo. That is the only way Congo will make sense to East Africa, and the rest of East Africa would make sense to Congo. That's really what we're trying to do in the month of May and June in DRC.
Thank you. And if you could, the team spent like a week in DRC. Some of the days we are spent in Goma.
Yes.
What opportunities are there that you can point out and you say, we saw this opportunity, this is a market, this is where people can be going?
So if you take low-level manufacturing, processing of food, manufacturing of things like foam mattresses, assembly of bicycles and motorcycles, these are things that are still 10, 15 years back in Congo, especially Eastern Congo, for many reasons I mentioned earlier. But Uganda has moved on. Uganda does a bit of assembly of these products, including things like televisions, which they import from China. I think we're attempting to assemble computers. So the low-level assembly for that market of Congo is a huge opportunity. The second opportunity is food. The cost of food in Congo is very high because when you have no infrastructure or very limited infrastructure, the cost of production is high, moving from one point of DRC to another. The cost of chilies, eggs, chicken, beef are all expensive. Yet Uganda is a low-cost producer. So we have an opportunity in the food, just general basic commodity food. It's a huge opportunity. And as I speak, some 10 or so companies have already secured contracts in the egg sector, in the chicken, in beef and dairy, in grains. So opportunities in low-level manufacturing and food, very good. And then finally, services, financial services, IT services, management services for companies, all this. Uganda is not too developed in them, but we have had a little bit of shift in the last 15 years, a shift that can give us leg room to supply Uganda and also have young people in medicine, in IT, go to Eastern Congo and run schools, hospitals, businesses, offer management services. These are all opportunities we saw in both Kinshasa and Goma.
Thank you. And apart from security, which is a key challenge, but also you have already mentioned the infrastructure. What other challenges are there accessing this market that you and your team will be dealing with?
I think the level of organization of that market is a challenge because if you want trade associations in dairy and beef, in coffee, in palm oil, they are still fluid. If I give you an example of the equivalent of Congo Export Promotion Board or Congo Private Sector Foundation, they still need to build data. They still need to build particular management, publicity, communication fundamentals that allow you to say, if I'm supplying Msingzi, I really know what Msingzi's capacity and I have a fallback. So how the market is organized, for me, is creates a non-tariff trade barrier on entry. The second one is language. If I produce milk and I write in English, but I have to put French, and that's a cost to me in terms of packing and packaging. And so we have studied French. These are not mega challenges because they speak Swahili, which we speak in Uganda and the rest of East Africa. They speak Lingala, which is a Bantu language. But really, if you're going to modernize trade and have a basic approach to this market, you need understanding at language level, at institutional level, so that you have market studies that are reliable. So these are challenges. I think that the other challenge I know is internal to Uganda. The lack of an export credit fund that would de-risk Ugandan companies entering Congo. You may know about this. We entered South Sudan in a rush from 2007 to 2011. When the country had problems in 2013, we had trouble with insurance, political risk. There was no fallback. Commercial banks, you've taken loans, they're charging you money. So Uganda, and we're working on this as export advisory committee to the president. We're trying to find a way to create a fund that can de-risk entry into that market so that both the Congolese and Ugandan farms can utilize it to supply that market very well.
Okay, thank you. People tend to talk, we know that Kinshasa and the Goma are like 16,000 miles apart. So when you are talking about this market in DRC, do you really want to focus on Eastern DRC? Do you want to go as far as Kinshasa? Where is the focus?
When you are supplying the market of Uganda, you understand that you supply Kampala, you've supplied Mbarara, you've supplied Jinja. Likewise, the nearness, the geographical nearness of Eastern Congo makes it easier for us, once we deal with insecurity and other problems I mentioned, makes it easier for us to supply Beni, Butembo, Bukavu, Goma. But you need to know that the companies that take these supplies have to take them to Matadi and Kasai region and Lubumbashi. So you need to know that when you supply beef to Goma, Goma is not going to consume all your beef because Goma has some cows. So the fact that they have cows is a little bit of competition unless you unite companies. Your biggest market is going to be Kisangani, is going to be Kinshasa, is going to be Lubumbashi. Actually, Kinshasa with 18 million people and the Katanga region with the highest minerals, Lubumbashi town. You know, when I'm speaking about this, I feel like, because I am not a young man, I'm not an old man. I still remember names like Stanleyville. Kisangani was called Stanleyville. I think Lubumbashi was called Elizabethville. This just 50 years ago, Leopoldville was Kinshasa. These were markets reserved for Belgium, for France, for Europe. We have to work hard that when we put our liter of milk or a kilo of grain in Goma, we should be conscious that it will end up in those towns. So while the geographical nearness helps us, I think my advice to Ugandan companies is go for the jugular, go for where the market is large, but walk carefully, have your warehouses at the border, have joint operations in Goma and Beni, and out of that, the big off-takers will supply the bigger markets where you have a better return.
So that means that if you are going to go as far as as far as Kinshasa, that would mean that small scale manufacturers or producers who don't have high capital fry their goods to Kinshasa may not benefit?
No, there is such a thing in business called agglomulation. Agglomulation means that if the market for grain is very good in Kinshasa, and there are no roads as they are, you have to fly to Kinshasa from Goma. You aggregate smaller companies to supply intermediate ones. The intermediate ones are the ones that we really have warehouses in Goma, in Beni, in Utembo, and the smaller ones, because this is you remember I said organization is a major market challenge. If you aggregate the producers of, say, pineapples from Masaka, and there is one off-taker called Musinguzi, who will now supply a dehydrated pineapple plant in Beni, meaning that you dry those fruits. It is very easy for the small to the intermediate to supply the large. So I'm not really worried because the market is a huge trigger. If the market demands that you wear a blue shirt, you have to figure out how to get blue shirts. In my opinion, that's the strategy. Go to the market, organize yourself back to the base.
Okay, and then there is this question. When people talk about trade with DRC, they think about minerals, trade in minerals, which come from that region. And there have been several reports showing that minerals from Eastern DRC are smuggled into East Africa and exported to China, to Middle East, and etc. As Uganda and DRC tries to formalize trade, how can Uganda help DRC to also formalize the trade in these minerals?
I think people who speak like that have not had an in-depth conversation with the new Congolese leadership. I want to tell you I was very impressed on two levels. First, the understanding of those ministers in President Tshisekedi's government is very interesting. They are saying there are 8 minerals that go into an iPhone. Those 8 minerals, 70% are found in our country. There is lithium ion batteries that the world requires for electric batteries, electric energy. So there is coltan that goes into production of particular products. They said these, us as the leadership of Congo are looking for partners to process them at base. Those partners can be East African, can be Europeans, but we want to retain a significant amount of margins on those minerals here. If you Ugandans who are slightly developed than us can find us both capital and skill, we will do it. Very impressive. Huh? I heard that from the Minister for External Trade, from the Minister for Tourism. And the other impressive thing is that they are all young. They are all in their 40s and below, meaning that they have a larger trajectory. They have plenty of legroom to play in their politics for a very long time. Now, if you have people who are ideologically switched on about Africa, I think that the world needs to know that even if the West is trying now to go to the best for commodities because of what has happened in Ukraine and Russia, Africans and especially Congolese are waking up. We should not take them for granted. And these exports of raw minerals will end now that we have a concerted, genuine conversation as East Africans. The other thing is this, that we tend to focus on minerals, gold, diamonds, oils. Congo has much more than that. The world's best timbers are found in that country. The world middle class is expanding even with Corona pandemic, even with the recessions in the world. Consumption is going up and entertainment and housing, house prices all over the developed world are going up. Furniture, timber, Congolese timber processed between Uganda or East Africa and Congo would give you much more than the diamonds would give you. So there is more we need to do as East Africans, in my opinion, to speak to each other genuinely. Because this conversation about, I have to speak to Congo, but I have to go through Belgium, has caused us a lot of issues. When we speak with each other and say, a leader has only, say, 10, 15 years to lead. The population explosion in Congo is the same across Africa. How do we immunize ourselves against loss of revenue on these natural resources that are dwindling, yet our populations are expanding? This conversation for me is long overdue. Finally, don't discount the question of education. There are many more people now educated in Africa, and the more people are educated, the more they demand for certain things like democracy. And democracy is about how you share resources. When you reduce peasantry in Africa, you automatically increase the demand for how we are treated in terms of minerals. Are you there?
Yes, I am.
Yes. You increase, when you reduce poverty at the bottom and raise education and raise attention to really what matters for countries, then the question of how you utilize those minerals will force a conversation between us as Africans. Because the next generation will not look on when the same situation that happened under Mobutu or under Idi Amin happens in our countries. So me, I'm very excited. It's with all the challenges we have in Africa, I am excited that we are collaborating, that for the first time in 500 years, the Great Lakes is returning under one entity. Huge breakthrough, because we were one. We speak same languages. After the year 1500, when the Portuguese came and destroyed Mombasa, Malindi, Pemba, 1555, and then allowed the British and the French and the Arabs, we just lost it completely. For now, for the first time in those 500 years, there's a strategic breakthrough called 7 East African countries. And what more? President Tshisekedi, his first speech in Nairobi was, I need a committee to deal with the natural resources as East Africans. These are great signals. Don't look at the negative side. Don't look at M23, all these things, they're always there. But we are moving in the right direction.
So once again, if I can ask this question in another way, how is Uganda going to tap into these opportunities of trading minerals? And you also mentioned timber, and tap into it in the formal trade way.
So there are about 3 things we're working on. There are so many things we could do, but there are things I call quick wins that give you some breakthrough to do the bigger things. First is to organize our border infrastructure. We've been taking loans from many groups to build warehouses, cold rooms at Mpondwe, at Bunagana. Now we need to work with the Congolese on that infrastructure. That infrastructure might be built by Uganda, but it's not for us. It is to supply the other market. So our committee is looking at what infrastructure we have right from Arua down up to Kisoro, that whole border. What can we do jointly with the Congolese to ensure that we put to use this infrastructure and it becomes storage facility, cold facility, immigration, taxation, and ensure that we can take our goods faster than we have done in the past. That's one thing we are working on. The second one is to ensure that our food safety standards can match international ones. If you're going to compete against French and Belgian companies in Congo that have had 60-year head start, you better have rules and regulations that are certified by WTO that provide safety for food products. Uganda hasn't had a genuine conversation about this for a very long time. Our food safety laws, our phytosanitary standards haven't been really up to standard. We are working on those very aggressively to ensure that we can compete, not just in Congo, but if you take our meat or grain in Congo, you are a Belgian, you should be able to import it into the EU, knowing that there are traceability issues that have been resolved. That many people don't think about it. They think you just grow your pineapples and rush into Congo. It's not going to be sustainable. You are going to compete with Argentinian pineapples or Argentinian grain, so you have to have the standard. The third one is we are trying to appoint a trade representative for Goma and for Kinshasa to ensure that we don't have this blind trade, that you hear the eggs market is okay, you rush there. No. Have someone who looks at the pricing of eggs landed in Goma and Kisangani and Kinshasa and can give you the ways and means how to sell eggs in that market so that you walk backwards and use that information. We don't have very good market research for our country on these markets. It's called blind trade. I don't know any country that has grown its exports working through blind trade. You need clarity of information so that at least you have 60% of information you need to make a decision to export. Those three are our midterm, approaches to handling this market of Congo and the regional markets.
Okay, thank you. And as the chairperson of this advisory, is it an advisory committee on export, on promotion of export, which was set up? I'm just forgetting it.
Potential Advisory Committee on Exports and Industrial Development, PASAID.
Okay, thank you. That's it. What did you bring to this committee, to this committee as a person? Because some people will want to say, this is the president in Rwanda, and that's it.
Okay. I have suffered all those misrepresentations in the public, and I walk through them. Listen, I started my business in 1998 in communication. At that time, I had no career guidance. I didn't know where I would end. By 2007, we branched into agriculture. We went back to our farm and did some bit of organization, and we are now producing dairy products. So we export in the region. And therefore, the experience of running a business for 20 years and having a heart for country is what I bring to this. The ideas really don't have to come from traditional established institutions. Ideas often come from the private sector, because when we switch on the lights, we pay. Often in a government, I can switch on the lights for 6 months and I don't know who pays. But the private sector lives by what it produces. So my experience in production, in processing, in business management, in communication, and in export in the regional markets of Kenya and South Sudan is good experience that I bring to this committee. Now, but let me also tell you, our committee does not replace government institutions. We are not in this for jurisdictional fights. Instead, we bring people together. So if you are National Bureau of Standards, and we have a representative in Congo who is talking to, I think it's called OCC or OCI, the equivalent of Bureau of Standards, we need to bring you on the same table with Export Promotion Board, Minister of Agriculture, Minister of East Africa, Minister of Foreign Affairs, so that we present one face on the market. Our institutions tend to want to present themselves, not knowing that whatever mistake or gain you make is for Uganda. So this committee brings public sector institutions together. But what more that it does is that we look for trade association leaders, apex body leaders, the grain, the coffees, the fish, fruits and vegetables, the dairy. That committee brings all this together, and for the first time, the private sector speaks directly with public sector on policy change, policies on credit, export credit fund, policies on laws and regulations for export, policies on export infrastructure. This collaboration, my brother, has been lacking in our country because everybody wants to protect their budgets and their territory without knowing that the private sector suffers. Let me just give you one example. When you take a container of chilies to Netherlands, and you really do not have significant laws and regulations on food safety, and that container is intercepted, you, the exporter, you suffer the cost of destroying that container. They force you to pay the cost for shipment and destruction. But you have nowhere to go because government institutions are not set to respond immediately. It takes time for them to say, oh, this interception came in 6 months ago, but 6 months ago, I lost my container a week ago. It doesn't make sense. Now, when you do not have private sector exporters who really build the economy, working with policymakers and institutions, you lose the amount we are losing today. We lose almost annually $100 million in interceptions in Europe for chilies, for chickens, for many things, because the private sector has not been involved in pursuing aggressively the necessary changes to protect our exports. That's what this committee does. We bring these issues at the highest level of government. The president has been kind to listen to us. He listens to so many, but he looks for results. So we are really aggressively working our way to find results in that partnership, so that those results are not for him, they are for our country. They are to ensure that we can move fast ahead of poverty. Now that we have parish development model increasing production, we need to organize ourselves for markets. That's what we bring to this committee.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I see my Zoom still has 5 minutes. Let me ask another question. When you look at the regional trade, our trade with Tanzania, we have a very, very huge trade deficit with Tanzania. I can't even imagine where it came from, nearly $600 million. We have a trade deficit with Kenya, which is also not the margin is not that big as Tanzania.
It's actually narrowing. We have narrowed that over the last 10 years to almost 20, between 15 to 20%.
Yeah. Then you look at Uganda has a big market in DRC. It has a big market it has a big market in DRC and South Sudan. Our trade with Burundi is not that much, but it's there. The issues that happened with Uganda, our market has not recovered. What does Uganda need to do better in the region to improve its the market that is there?
I think let's start with Tanzania, where you came from. Many of you are young. For context purposes, we used to have East African harbors, ports and harbors, meaning Uganda was really an owner of the port of Dar es Salaam and Mombasa. After 1977, each country went on its own, and the cost of shipment on the countries that have ports really is added on to our consumers in Uganda. That's why often you see this trade imbalance. Secondly, Tanzania tends to have also other groupings they are in. You know, they're in SADC. So their trade with SADC and relationships, I think, tend to be slightly more important. I hope they are not with East Africa. Many reasons we could advance. Kenya, we really used to have a $500 million trade imbalance. We actually surpassed around 5 years ago, 2016.
I think it was 2018.
Yeah, we sold them $600 million worth of goods and services. They sold us 500, and they started, wondering how we were able to do that, because our production increases and our climate is slightly different. South Sudan, we were taking $1 billion up until 2013. It went into war. Kigali, I think, was around $150 million, came down to 10 or less until, I don't know what the figures are since the border was opened in March. But here is the point. Trade is like growing a child. You nurture the child progressively through seasons. There's no point at which this child ceases to be your child. They have emotional, physical, financial needs. You go to nurture them. That's how I see trade. That's how I see growing a country. how do you nurture a child? I've really used an allegory that is very personal to me. One, genuine conversation. We need to talk to each other as East African countries, because, you know, differences that are political, differences that are maybe military, should not stand in the way of trade, because trade is the only way you build this region. If one ever wants to make East Africa better than EU, they must start with trade. Absolutely. If you want to make an East African Federation, forget if you are not trading genuinely. So an honest, genuine conversation between Uganda and all our neighbors. And the president has done that. He remains, even when they close borders, he has never closed a border in the last 36 years. Even when there is trouble in South Sudan and there are misgivings from Ugandan constituencies saying, don't go in, he goes in. Somalia, same. DRC, same. So this Pan-African attitude is not altruistic. When we keep speaking, we keep trading. When we keep trading, we deal with poverty in our countries and we unite our countries in the long run.
Thank you for your time. I see I have 1 minute to go, so before I'm automatically cut off. And the Bagonza, the one who has organized this, also thank you. I think this article may...
And I see Jonathan and everyone on. Thank you for the... Please make sure you give us copies of this, both online and hard copy if you can.
Okay. I'll send the online.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a nice evening.